Hello and welcome to another episode of the Haskincast podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and we are on episode 320. I have two absolutely wonderful guests here to talk about an amazing documentary that was made on Lee Kerslake, of course, most well-known being the drummer of Uriah Heep. From London Bridge, we have Tayla Goodman. Tayla, how are you today?
I'm really good, thank you. And thank you for inviting me here.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. And of course, the hardest working man in show business, one of the kindest, my dear friend, Steve Weltman. Steve, how are you?
I'm good, Scott, thank you. And by the way, it's London Bridge Films.
London Bridge Films. Okay. My apologies, Tayla.
That's okay.
I have to start by telling the story of how this came together originally. When I decided to start Uriah Heep, the Magician's podcast with Mick Box's blessing and endorsement, I was given Steve's information. He was managing Paul Newton, Ken Hensley, and of course, Lee Kerslake at the time. And it was the most unfortunate timing in history because I knew that Lee had been ill. And so I remember when I wrote to you, Steve, I said, I don't know Lee's current status. I know he hasn't been well. If he's not up to an interview, I would understand, but certainly would love to chat with all three of these gentlemen. And about 2 hours later, I started seeing the posts on social media that Lee had passed. And I felt like a jerk because I mean, there's really no reason to. I didn't know what state he was in at that time, but it's still like in the middle of all of this. Now I'm bugging you. Here's some stranger coming out of the woodwork, begging you for interviews, and your friend just passed, and you were so great. You wrote me pretty quickly back and said, I don't know if you've seen it on the socials, but Lee just passed away. Give me a couple weeks on the other interviews. I'll get them done. And I thought, in the midst of dealing with all of that you have, I mean, aside from the emotion of losing your friend, but all the stuff that now has just fallen on your plate, I thought that was absolutely amazing. And then we unfortunately had to repeat that about a month later when Ken passed, because the day that Ken's interview came out was the day that he passed. I have to applaud you for your incredible professionalism and communication. I would like to think I would have done the same thing, but that there was so much to deal with. And I really appreciated and respected your getting in contact with me on both of those occasions.
Thank you. They're lovely words. And I think I'd like to think that any other human being would, when they, lose friends, first of all, would do the same thing.
Yeah, I would like to think that, but I don't know that that's the case.
Do not bring politicians into this discussion.
Yeah, I avoid that as much as possible. So I had the pleasure of watching this wonderful documentary, Lee Kerslake, Not On The Heep, just a few days ago. Incredibly touching. How did this come together that you, Tayla, decided to do this documentary? And at what point did you actually start filming?
Wow, okay. So it came together when I met Lee in Crystal Palace Park in London on a dog walk. And had no idea who he was, and we just started chatting because we both got dogs, and our dogs got on. My dog was being really naughty and thought his name was Cheese because that was the only way to get him back. And yeah, Lee just started telling me about we were just talking about what each other's did, and he said he used to sing, and I said I make films, and he told me that obviously he had cancer and really wanted to make a charity song and wanted to do a video, and did I know anybody that could help him? So I said, well, let me listen to it and I'll see if I can find someone to help. He said, if you've got any graduates, So I took it home one Easter and I just fell in love with the music, and I decided to storyboard it very quickly. And then I went back and I said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll do the music video for you. So we pulled in lots of people that we knew around the park who had various businesses and things. And we shot the music video in a day and a half.
Wow.
That was for Celia, Sienna,
Mm-hmm.
on his album Eleventeen, and as time was going on, every time he performed, he felt a lot better. He seemed to get well, and I was always kind of hopeful that it would be his comeback and that he would get better and the music would help him, and it did for a very long time. And he did say that he really missed being on stage and wanted to make a comeback. And he felt that there were things going against him. And I said, well, why don't we do a documentary on you and help you make that comeback? And he said, what, you do that? And I had no idea how I was going to do it at the time. But generally, when I say something, I will do it 100%. And yeah, so that was when we did his music video, was around about what, 2017, 2016. Yeah. And then, yeah, so we started shooting, funnily enough. The first time we shot was in Lee's favorite restaurant, the fish restaurant, in near London Bridge, and we shot there Christmas of 2017. That was the first set of shots we did. And then from there, the following February, we went over to the Guinness factory to shoot Lee with Joe Elliott from Def Leppard. So, and then it just all fell into place. And of course, you know, to begin with, I'm going to be quite honest, I was unsure of what the story was going to be, and I was struggling to find the bit that would really grip the audience and would do Lee proud. And that's when Steve came to the rescue, and we had many chats about the storyline and what angles we could take. And yeah, Steve, you know, has been on board ever since and been an absolute great help in steering the way the story was, the thread was going to go, the narrative.
Yeah, he's like Steve that Steve.
Steve interrupts by saying, Tayla's being far too modest. Maybe I helped, but Tayla, it's her film.
Well,
and she deserves an enormous amount of credit and a wonderful word that is rare, and that was her resilience. You know.
Yeah, I felt that this was very much a work of passion, that it was Lee wanting to tell the story, but also you wanting to tell it. I felt that unity in it. But one note that I had written down fairly early on watching the documentary was I felt that the music, the process of recording the album and that was very therapeutic to Lee, that it did seem like when he was working with a guitar player or, you know, working on a song, all of a sudden, like everything else just melted away. It was non-existent. He was very focused and drawn into what he was doing. And I think as music listeners, as creators, I think that's very true for a lot of people. Music really is a difference maker in our world. I mean, imagine a movie without songs.
No, absolutely. I think you make a lot of sense. You know, it's just, but I think it applies, you know, probably to all the arts. You know, if it's a musician, a songwriter, and or if it's a painter, a sculptor, if it's an author, a poet, that once they're immersed in their work, everything else is forgotten for that period of time.
Oh yeah. I mean, I don't know how many times I'll be working in the studio and all of a sudden I'll look over and notice that the sun has been up for a while. And I thought it was maybe midnight, 1 o'clock. You know, you just get lost.
Sure. Yeah. And you weren't in the casino.
Right. No, I wasn't. I'm curious though. So 2017, were you working off of a demo version of Celia, Sienna, or had the final version been recorded at that point?
No, that was the demo version. It was, well, it wasn't even the demo. It was, hadn't even, well, actually, no, it hadn't it, Steve? Actually, no, he did. No, it was the demo version we were working with, wasn't it?
Yeah.
When we did Celia. Yeah, it was.
And once you finished the video, you substituted the master.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I love the camaraderie. I mean, especially because Lee and Mick Box were so close. I mean, the brotherhood between them is immense, as you can get from the interviews with Mick. But I really think that played out so much so in that video. I mean, you felt like these two were almost joined at the hip. They were so close. And even though we're really watching a video, not hearing them talk, you're seeing them together, you're seeing them interact, and you just feel how close they are. How did was that something that just kind of happened? Was that something that you filmed a couple of takes to get that? How did that come out?
You're referring to the music video?
Yes, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. No, it was just natural. They were just naturally funny together. I mean, there were a couple of takes, and obviously I was working to a storyboard that I'd got, but they were just super funny. They just gelled. Everything they did worked. And I was able to then cherry pick the best shots that they'd done. But each time they did a take, it was better than the last and better than the last. It just got funnier and funnier. Yeah, they're both two amazing people, but incredibly funny comedians too.
Yeah,
they made it. They made the day go by really well.
I can imagine.
Humor for the
Yeah.
parents. Humor was a part of their existence. I recall a visit because I would go over to Lee's kind of every 7-10 days, the last kind of year and a half of what turned out to be the end of his life, and we'd sit and talk, and some, you know, there might be a bit of business. Of course, in 2020, discussing anything got harder because of all the medication he was on. I mean, you could be in conversation with him, and then suddenly he'd go and he'd be asleep.
Yeah.
But Mick came over about 10 days before, as it turned out, Lee passed, and he hadn't seen him for a long time. Certainly not in 2020. So that was his first visit, and so he brought with him a half a bottle of Cointreau and some mature manchego cheese and another cheese, I can't remember which it was, that Lee loved. And Lee then was in his bedroom and basically at that time couldn't literally stand up. So Mick came in the bedroom, and I luckily sat with them, and they just talked stories. And I was in tears half the time, laughing, because they were just hilarious. You know, I mean, you know, I think I've mentioned this to Tayla before. I mean, you know, if only we'd have had a camera in that room, that could have been another film on its own.
Oh, I believe. Well, I mean, the history those two had, all the years of touring and everything, pretty amazing. When you show it near the beginning, everybody in the current band of Uriah Heep comes and gives Lee a big hug in the wheelchair as they're about to take the stage, and he's waiting for them to get to Lady in Black. I could be mistaken, but it sounds like the music that was being played in the house at the time was Black Sabbath playing Paranoid. I could kind of hear it a little bit through the door, and I thought, I don't know if that was intentional, but if not, that was pretty ironic of all the bands
ironic.
that could have been playing.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional.
It wasn't. No, it was just playing.
Oh, wow. That timing's fantastic.
That's a great competition question.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what music is on the beginning of Lee's documentary?
Right. I love
I think what's important here, Scott, is that, you know, what Tayla captured is basically, as an advert in England says, you know, it says what it says on the tin. So by that, it's yes, it's about Lee's career, but it's also his battle against his illness, against cancer, you know, which some people are still a bit shy about, you know, discussing the so-called C word.
Right.
And for me, personally, let alone professionally, I think what Tayla's captured and what all your listeners will absolutely get when they get this film is, one, yes, Lee's humor, but what a absolutely incredible human being. You know, just, I mean, I sadly have lost other friends to cancer.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, from when Lee was first diagnosed, which was about 2 years before Tayla started filming at the beginning, you know, I'd spent 3 years setting up a reunion show in Moscow for Ken and Lee with the current Uriah Heep.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, we'd rehearsed for a full week in the UK. It went really well. We flew out following week and in a beautiful hotel in the Four Seasons. And sound check day, fine, done. Day of the show, Lee couldn't get out of bed. His back had gone.
Oh.
Okay, got osteopaths in all the, and he made it, but you know he'd started to suffer there, but you wouldn't have known it.
Mm-hmm.
He wouldn't have. He just got on with it, and how, you know, Taylor's captured both sides, the medical side,
Mm-hmm.
which, if you like, is the sadder side, and then the joy, which is the music side, and brought it all together, and it's a documentary. It's fantastic.
I agree. There's a serious balance that you captured between the two, and I think there's that moment where Lee does kind of have to deal with his mortality a little bit, but he didn't seem to be, because there's two kinds of people, right? There's the people that will go, oh, my life is over right now because I just found out, and even though I've been given a 2-year clock, it's over, it's done. And there are people that will fold and cave and will die quickly because they just have accepted it. And then there's people like Lee who says, I have something I want to do with the time that I have left, and I'm going to give it everything that I've got to make it happen. And I love that you captured both sides of it, because in the middle of all this, yes, he's still dealing with the physical difficulties and challenges of his declining health, but he's also still got that passion. You can see how much he misses being on stage. You could see in the beginning when he gets up out of his wheelchair and closes the door after being greeted by all the members of the current Uriah Heep band, you can see how hard it is for him not to have just walked out there on stage with them where he belonged. And you feel that. I mean, you can't watch that and not feel like you're inside his body needing to go out there. And that was an amazing moment. Absolutely amazing. I don't want to give too much away, but when he does go out to play Lady in Black, there's a beautiful moment that you captured in the bottom right of the screen as you're shooting out to the crowd. There's this woman who just covers her eyes. She's so overwrought with emotion of seeing Lee come out on stage. One of the most beautiful moments in the documentary. And that might have been just a by chance capture, but when you point the camera, those are the moments you can get.
Absolutely. I mean, in all fairness, on that particular day, I did have 5 cameras. So I had them up in the gods, down in the pits, facing the audience, facing the stage. We had some GoPros as well. I was absolutely adamant, because this was part of his bucket list, to get back up on stage with Heep one more time. So I was not going to miss one element. And the way that Mickey and Ace Trump had set it up was to not let the audience know. And, you know, at the end, bring him on. And so it was a shock to the audience. So we kind of knew we were going to capture, you know, people not expecting him to be there and being completely overwhelmed by his presence on stage. And boy, did he rock that stage. He absolutely rocked it. And going back to what you said early on about music being a therapy, you would not know for 1 minute while he was on that stage that he was sick. It was only when he comes off the stage that you realize, wow, he might have overdone it a little bit, you know, but that's when you really know. But all the time he was on the stage, you would just never have known that that man had cancer and that he hadn't got long to live. You just wouldn't know.
Well, and the adrenaline rush that you get from going out and performing is immense, you know, but to to reunite with your best friend and to get up there and do what you've been wanting to do for a long. I mean, I can't imagine. I would have found it difficult to play. I mean, you'd find the gear to do it, but I think standing next to Mick, being on stage, looking at those people watching you and just being so amazed that you came out and no one knew you were going to be there. I can't imagine the emotional side of that for Lee, what that felt like. You know, I would think that would be pretty amazing.
Absolutely.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I think so, as well, with the film, I think that, you know, we've touched on, you know, the medical side. We're talking a little, without giving too much away, about his oxygen was his music.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, obviously, certainly all the Uriah Heep fans, young and old, know of Lee, and some others, and the rock world knows about Lee, the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
What they're going to find out in the film is from, if you like, his peers, was how important his vocals were.
Yes.
And shit, he plays the piano as well. I won't say which artist says that, but I'm sure you both realise what I'm talking about.
Oh yeah.
When he goes to somebody's home, you know, and that's
the
the other. Yeah, I think that, you know, it's you know, when you know, it's public knowledge that Lee, in the early days of Heep, I wasn't around, nor was Tayla, but he, you know, he had no relationship with their original manager, Jerry Bron. He didn't like him at all.
Yeah.
And you'd have thought that as that band were developing, because, I mean, not as Lee joined, they'd started to make a noise with the first two albums. When you get to, you know, Demons and Wizards, Magician's Birthday, you know, it catapulted them.
Oh yeah.
And if you were the manager at the time, and you know, you already had Hensley about to make a first solo record, why did Jerry Bron never give Lee that opportunity?
Right.
Because he can sing, he can play, he can write, you know, and so. But again, the film shows not just the drummer, the human being, the drummer, plus these other talents.
Well, and I think a lot of times drummers aren't taken seriously as creative musicians. They're taken as somebody who can hit things very well. But when it comes to writing songs, even the bands will be, you know, the drummer will come and say, hey, I wrote a song. Here's the lyrics. Let's work on it. And the band's like, oh, great. Drummer wrote a song. Anyway, what are we going to work on today? You know, and they're not. True. Yeah. And so I think a lot of times, too, when drummers put out albums, and I think about like Cozy Powell putting out Tilt, it's expected that it's going to be a heavy percussion album, and it's not going to be a good collection of songs. It's going to be drum driven. And I don't think that Eleventeen was at all drum driven. It was a very vocal, very melodic, very passionate album. I love it from start to finish. I think it's a fantastic album. And Taylor, I love that you were able to capture some of the making of this album, working on the songs, putting it together, what you went through, Steve, trying to make this happen on the you know, the business side of it. Let me ask you first, Tayla, did you feel like you like it might be difficult for him to be creative and really work on the songs while he was being filmed working on the songs? Or was he just like, okay, you're in the room, whatever, I'm working?
The latter, yeah.
Sorry, I had to laugh.
Lee was in his element. He played to the camera very well. He loved it being there. He's a true pro, you know, definitely. It didn't matter who was in the room, what was in the room. He was still incredibly creative. And there's some great points where he pulled some funny faces when Jakey, the guitarist, got a few chords wrong.
I love that.
He'd be like, what was that? So no, he had a great musical ear, amazing musical ear. And he picked up on everything. So no, he was great. We were kind of like the Three Musketeers, Jakey, Lee, and I, because we were traveling around all the time filming. And every day was just different and funny. And yeah, he was super, super creative and gave some great tips out to the music that was being played and how it should be played. And he would just create a chord literally there and then. You know, I remember when we were filming his little birthday party, without giving too much away, he just started singing some music and adding bits to it. He would just pick up a key. He picked up my daughter's keyboard, funnily enough, at one point, and he just started playing away on it and started singing lyrics, making tunes up just immediately. So no, it didn't matter where he was or who was looking at him. Creative streak never went.
Yeah.
Never.
And I feel too that he did this album uncompromised. He made the album he wanted to make and didn't say, well, I can't do this. This isn't going to be able to happen. I really feel like he captured what he wanted to capture. Would you say that's the case?
Me? Is that to me?
To both of you. Yeah. We'll start with you, Steve.
Oh, yeah, I'll let you answer that one.
I think that's more a question for me than Tayla, with great respect, Tayla. It's difficult to really. I think that what you and Tayla started to talk about earlier was that this was therapy for Lee. So when he met Tayla, and you have her description when they're in the park, and then she heard a demo of Celia's Sienna, so she took it on board and came up the idea of, oh, let's make a film. So there were other songs that he demoed and played to me, but I didn't think they were good enough. Okay, but I understood them, and I was much gentler with him than I was just now. Okay. Because I realized literally just before we started the rehearsals with Ken and Uriah Heep in 2015, I knew his diagnosis, and we'd had a long conversation a couple of days before we went to the rehearsals at his home. And, Lee's attitude was, sod it, I'm going to beat this, blah, 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 blah. But that was Lee. That's not just everybody. And Lee was 100% committed to that, which is why he actually lived so long. But he started talking about writing. And you could just see, it was almost like his brain was open. You could read his mind. And it was saying, this is going to help me along the way.
Yeah.
And so once he'd romanced Tayla and he'd got a film director on board, he knew he had to write more. And he had Jake, who plays guitar on the record, was a huge help for him. A young man, and he could bounce ideas off with Jake, and some days he'd come home, and I'd be there when he'd come home from the studio, and he'd be like, "Oh, bloody hell, this is not. I don't like this. What do you think of this, Steve?" I go, "Oh, I don't like the chorus." "Yeah, I was thinking that myself." And then the following, I go back and he'd rewritten the chorus already at home, and he said, "Oh, do you like this?" I said, "Yeah." And first of all, I can't say it was immediate, and I can't say when it was. Just after Tayla started filming, because originally we were going to do a charity show. There's a very famous club in London, Scott, still there, called the 100 Club.
Okay.
You can Google it when you see everybody that's played there.
Mm.
It's as famous as the Marquee.
Okay.
And so we had a date, didn't we, Tayla? We had meetings at Taylor's home, and got various people involved, and other acts all set. And then he had a down, the illness grabbed him, so we had to postpone it, cancel it in the end.
Yeah.
But writing, I would say, was equally as important to Lee as actually recording and actually making a record for release.
Yeah.
Because I think, it's what, again, Tayla said earlier. Once he was, in the studio, whether she had 20 cameras there or one, when he was focused, he was focused.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that the writing, because after 11 was finished, although it wasn't going to come out until the following year, which he knew,
mm-hmm.
I mean, he could not pick up sticks.
Wow.
Okay. I mean, beginning of 2020, he asked me to get him a state-of-the-art Yamaha electric kit, which he could put in his bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
Again, therapy, so he could play.
Right.
I bought that from Graham Russell Drums, the biggest drum shop wholesaler in Britain.
Mm-hmm.
And it's actually about 25 minutes from where I live.
Ah.
And so I went down and spoke to Graham, said, look, this is for Lee, because these things, thousands and thousands of pounds. So he told me what he could do for Lee. So basically almost gave it to him as a cost.
Wow.
And I took it to Lee's, and 6 weeks later, Lee said to me, do you think you could speak to Graham and see if he'll buy it back?
Really?
Couldn't
because of that. Yeah.
Planning.
Well,
So,
and playing
but
an
that
electronic
didn't-
kit is really
but that
different
didn't-
because the heads
it
are very
is.
bouncy and they're harder to play in some. You could cheat a lot if you're not a good drummer, but they're in some ways harder to play for people that are used to playing the normal Mylar heads because they're way too bouncy. They're almost uncomfortable at times.
Yeah, but you're talking about, I mean, in terms of Lee playing anything with sticks, you're talking, I mean, again, I'm not giving it away. Watch the documentary, folks, because you'll see something in a blink that Lee did, that we filmed, Tayla filmed, at a certain place, and he just took to it like duck to water.
Mm-hmm.
But what was important was, as much as, and I would hasten to add for Graham Russell's sake, that he gave me the exact amount of money that Lee paid for it. Gave it all back.
Very nice. Very
Absolutely.
nice.
Absolutely. Out of respect for Lee, not me.
Right.
But it didn't stop Lee writing.
Mm-hmm.
He had
I
a little keyboard at home, and we'd talk about it, and so he kept trying.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fact that we then came up with, I started to work on a running order. Now that is something I should have phoned you, actually, Tayla. Oh man, I should have just set up a GoPro in his lounge. Every week I go over and we go through the running order, and it's never right. It's never right. It probably took 2 months to agree, because with the running order, there's of course the artistic, the creator's opinion, and then you got to think about the media's opinion and the public's.
Right.
But when we finally came up with what turned out to be the last one, I don't know. I think we were both relieved, and Sue, his wife, I don't believe you two have finally agreed on this. Let's open a bottle and have a drink.
Well, and there are some really wonderful guests that you were able to get. The one thing I've always felt about Lee was that I've never seen a lot of press on him. Of course, I live in America, so we don't get as much of that over here when it comes to European bands. But I've never heard of other drummers talking about Lee or other bands talking about Lee that much. So to have guests like, Joe Elliott from Def Leppard, Ian Pace from Deep Purple, who was the drummer, was much like Lee, one of the two drummers that I grew up listening to the most. And in fact, I'm still hoping I get a chance to talk to Ian Pace about the food fights that Ken Hensley was telling me about from back in the day. But the one that surprised me most, and I don't want to give away too much, but was the moment that Lee was sitting with Kiss, because I wouldn't have never imagined the influence that Lee as a singer and as a drummer had on that band. And watching them talk to him with such admiration, especially Gene Simmons, because Gene Simmons can tend to be very cold and make you feel like everyone's beneath him. And I don't mean that in a mean way. That's just how he comes across. He's very, very cold and direct. But I really felt something different coming from him when he was speaking with Lee. That was a very magical moment. What was it like to be in the room filming that?
Well, I mean, I've not grown up in that era. And as I said, when I met Lee, I didn't even know who he was, even when I'd agreed to do his music video. And he mentioned, oh, we'll get Mickey involved. And I'm like, well, who's Mickey? So I really don't know, I didn't know of these people. But I have to say, Gene, Paul, Eric, and Tommy were adorable. They were the nicest bunch of guys you could ever meet, ever. Gene was funny in a dry humor sort of way. He was really, really funny. Mm. Paul was just incredibly inspirational and left Lee feeling really on top of the world. And he talked about excerpts from his book, and you shouldn't live on sort of like what ifs and buts, go out and get it. So he was incredibly inspirational. And Eric sat there in awe of him, talking about, how he moved wind with his sticks. And it was lovely. They were wonderful. They'd sorted out the room for us to film in, absolutely everything. They'd organized the lot for us. And I know that, they had supported Uriah Heep at one point, and then Uriah Heep had supported them. And so they did have a lot of time together, in the past. And for Lee, it meant so much, because part of his bucket list was to meet up with his old friends one last time. Mm-hmm. And so that was a really big key moment for him. And they invited us to come and watch their concert. And we went, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful, wonderful moment to see Lee so happy. Mm-hmm. And all the comments that they made about him, he was just beaming from ear to ear, and he was like, what, you took that from me, and you got that inspiration from it. It was amazing. It was incredible to film, incredible to watch.
I can compare that to an interesting moment where Metallica was being interviewed, and I don't remember who was doing the interview, but they had Elton John on from Satellite, and he was saying that there was a song that James Hetfield wrote that Elton John felt was one of the best songs ever. And I watched James Hetfield just melt and fall apart at that. I mean, how do you take bands that are like some of the biggest bands in history and know that you've done something that affected them in a positive way? You were a part of their success, and not just be completely overcome with emotion. How do you not walk out of that just kind of floating through the door?
I think actually, although this is an instinctual answer to your question, I actually just think it's common sense. Because it's like when you go to school, college, university, and there's a particular teacher that you connect with, mm-hmm. And you submit your exam papers and you get an A+ or whatever that is these days, you just feel like the acknowledgement from that person is just amazing.
Yeah.
It could be in sport, you know, with a coach, and you do what the coach told you, and you come off and it's just like, oh, you were great, you were great. And I think that musicians, and particularly with no disrespect to younger musicians today at all, who I still work with, as you know, Scott, that there was a camaraderie and a respect that started a long time ago that will never wane. It just continues.
Yeah.
And again, in those days, you know, touring, you might have had 2 or 3 bands on the same bus. And it's like, oh, Fred, do you want to come and play on my album next week? What are you doing? Yeah, that's why you got old albums that have got like so many different guests on. You don't get that anymore.
No, you know what? It's interesting that you say that, because I was telling somebody not too long ago, back in the old days, if you take if you're familiar with Laura Ingalls and the Little House on the Prairie show that we had here in the States, if Laura's house burned down tonight, tomorrow morning 95% of the people would be out there chopping down trees, building her a new house. Nowadays, you can't get somebody to help you move a couch without buying them dinner. You know, it's a different world. And I find it's very much the same with musicians. It used to be, yeah, I'll play on your thing. Oh, maybe, you know, you'll do something with me one of these days. And there was that just genuine give and take. And nowadays it's, well, you know, I'll have to talk to my manager and get my record company to approve this because, you know, I'm signed on this label and you're on that label and I might not be able to be on your thing. It's so political and so legal. And I feel like we've lost a lot of that camaraderie with the way that things have gone in the business.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that certainly one of the big stumbling blocks is recording contracts that prohibit artists from appearing on other musicians, you know, appearing on other records, because they're so restricted in their contractual arrangements. But I want to come back to something a bit more positive.
Yeah.
But I mean, one of the things also with Lee was, you know, I finally got him to download Spotify about 2018 and explain how it worked, because he wasn't, his hands were getting very big, and also he, you know, bit of a tech dinosaur. So unless he was in the studio, of course.
Sure.
And so he realized, you know, the way I described it, I said, look, you got Spotify. You've got the biggest record shop in the world in your pocket. So, you know, I'd walk in one day and it's, oh, Steve, I just found this old Kiss song. And he'd play it, you know, and then he'd say, oh, and I just found this, you know, this band, Tayla and the Goodmans. Have a listen to this. It says it's brand new. They're like kids. And so, you know, I'd listen to it. And he was always wanting me to find, when I went over, now and then, not all the time, playing something of a young band. So I played him a bit of Our Propaganda. So jump forward to his electronic drum kit, beginning of 20, and it's going back in February, end of February, that in 2020. But he'd ordered online, which had been delivered, a fabulous new drum stool for the kit. And I said, well, I don't know if Graham will buy it. I can ask him. He said, no. He said, I know what I'll do. So I took his drum kit back, and a few days later I went back, and he said, oh, here's the drum stool. And he gave it to me, signed it to Charlie in Our Propaganda. And Charlie's nickname in the band is Little Lee.
Oh, that's awesome. I love
Yeah.
that. And he's a very good drummer.
Oh, he is.
I
And
really like that band.
he's a student.
Mhm.
I tell you this, I mean, all right, Charlie's not a baby, and he's all of what, 24. But when Taylor Hawkins died, Charlie, it was like his brother.
Mhm.
I mean, the kid was devastated,
Yeah.
devastated. He was one of the first people that bought tickets for the tribute shows in London.
Mhm.
And yeah, I mean, yeah, it's a student.
Yeah. I'm very anxious to see where their career goes. They're a great band. I talk to Jack all the time, and I really,
Yes,
really,
he told me.
yeah. As musicians, I really, really like their music. Um, Taylor,
Their new songs are going really, really well.
yeah,
But
he told
anyway,
me they're working on some new stuff. Taylor, I wanted to ask you. I don't want to give away the reveal. I'm sure you're going to know what I'm talking about, but there's a moment where I think is a very historical moment that you captured in this documentary, where something arrives at Lee's house. Um, I'm incredibly grateful that you captured that, because I think that was a very beautiful moment. Without giving away what it is, because I want people to enjoy this as it unfolds, I have to ask you, as a person who's focused on, okay, we've got to get the shots, we've got to make sure the audio is good, all these things that you're dealing with as a filmmaker, but you're also being caught up because Lee's your friend now, and you're happy that this is happening to your friend. How is it, how do you divide those two elements of being a human being and being that you're working a job that's very important to capture this right the first time?
Well, funny you say that. There were some moments. Um, I think for me, because of the type of documentaries I make, I'm only really interested in human interest stories. So I'm always driven by compassion and the right side. So at the end of the day, I will not go for a shot if it's going to harm the person in it in any way or put them down. So person first, and the shots will come. So that's how it always was with me. There was one time when we were actually, and I'll come back to the shot you're talking about, but or to the variety of shots, where he fell over in on his birthday party, and it was very, very difficult to get him up. And obviously, the first thing I did was put the camera down and help, like with everybody else, to get him back up. I could have shot that. I could have convinced Lee that should have been in there, but that is not what the documentary was about, because he's such an inspiration. It's not a sad documentary. It is just because of what's happening to him. So we didn't need to put those areas in. We didn't need to show any of that. And it's not human to, to always show those areas. And the film did not warrant it. So going back to this very special moment that with Steve's help and how it was going to work out, wasn't quite sure how I was going to film it, but I am an observational doc maker, so I'm literally follow people around with a camera and just get whatever I can, never to turn the camera off, because they're always the best. As soon as you turn the camera off, you get the best shots. People say the best.
For sure, yeah.
Which people always say, "You recording?" Because I keep my light off. I go, "No, I'm not recording," and I'll put it down and it's still recording. But no, that was a very special moment, to capture that, incredibly special. And it captured the raw emotion of how he felt when that happened. Yeah, and it was, and that's the bit that moves me quite a bit. Well, one of the bits that really moves me is when I see that, and I see his little hand punch in the air. And that, yeah, for me, it was great to capture that, really great to capture it. But I literally rarely took the camera off my shoulder, if I'm going to be quite honest. It was, I've grown muscles where I didn't have them before.
Sure.
I would also like to say that for Taylor, that your question, Scott, about, how do you film something like that? It's really no different to Taylor's description of filming Lee in the studio. In other words, when she's got the camera, she's got her creative hat on.
Right.
So she's looking to get everything in her case that she can. It's when she sits down to look at all of it is when her humanity comes in.
So yeah, so it's like you separate.
All right, Tayla.
You separate that. I'm on a job, I have to do this, and I can compartmentalize and deal with that in the next phase.
Yeah, because if you're shooting all what we're talking about, which is very emotional, and she's got a lot of footage, and then she's got to whittle that footage down to X amount of time, she's going to choose what's best. And that's where her humanity comes into it. And in this case, Lee gets the benefit of the humanity.
Oh, yeah. And I will agree with you, Tayla. I think that you didn't need to show a lot of the rougher moments, but I think you gave us enough to understand where he was at without having to overplay it. Whereas I feel like a lot of people would have made this a documentary about a guy who was in the last months of his life trying to get something done. Your documentary was about somebody trying to get something done in the last moments of their life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. I mean, if we could have titled this In a More Humane World, well, if I'd have had my way, I'd have called it Lee Kerslake, a human being. And a drummer.
And a songwriter. And right. Exactly.
It's that's, to me, it's got nothing to do. Well, I suppose it has, because I knew him, but it's a beautiful film.
Oh yeah.
It's a beautiful. Yes, I'm involved, and people think, oh, you're only saying that, but it's just a fact. I challenge anybody, watch it and you'll see.
Yeah, if you're not feeling something while you're watching this, you don't have a soul. That's where I stand on it. I want to. I think too that it's also a great documentary, or it's not a documentary about making Eleventeen, but it does capture a lot of the development of it. And so if he had done a documentary on it, a lot of this footage would have been perfect for like a behind the scenes, or we're doing a DVD with the CD, because I love seeing developmental processes with artists. I love seeing how songs come together. I love seeing how they think and how they feel music, because we all do it differently. So you did a great job capturing that. But Steve, I wanted to ask you, I was thinking about this while I was watching it. You worked very hard to find a record company to put this through, to do the release. Why wouldn't a self-release, not do an album, maybe not do a vinyl, but do a small run of CDs that you could crowdfund, and then just release it on his own through DistroKid, or that'll send it out to Spotify and all the places? What was the importance of doing it through a record company?
Because it's what he wanted. I gave him my word, no matter how long it took, I would get a record deal for him. And I'm a man of my word. And
you came through, and you absolutely did.
Yeah, I mean, it's people laugh about it, to a point now, but Lee asked me if when he went, that he said, will I stay in touch with Sue, his wife? So I go and see Sue every 10 days, 2 weeks. I go and spend the afternoon with her. And we became friends, probably particularly in the last 2 years of Lee's life.
Sure.
We became very close. And that friendship has grown. Because, and she's also been handled this with great integrity. She always kept a low profile from his career. But this whole, I'm sure Tayla would agree, she's been amazing. They both were. Bearing in mind, she became a 24/7 carer. Yeah. For the last 18 months of his life, maybe 2 years.
Yeah. And the
yeah,
emotional
no,
side for her.
Lee wanted that, you know, the old artist thing, you know, I want a record deal. I want to publish it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't easy.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, of course, the album came out after he passed.
You know, it's Lee Kerslake. Right. Yeah. A 72-year-old drummer looking for a record deal has never made a record in his life. You know.
Well, yeah, and you know, there's always the talk in the Uriah Heep forums about the missing magical album that never got released. Is it going to get released? And I'm like, you know, there's so much that goes into that. You have to
That's
secure.
a myth, by the way.
Oh,
that is a myth.
How so?
What is it? 10 miles or something?
10 Miles High is the working
that's
title.
a myth.
Yeah,
It doesn't exist.
I've heard tracks that were
there are some
the previous
very dodgy things.
Yeah.
But I don't want to talk about that now.
Okay. Well, I was just
we can do another one separately.
I was just saying to the point related to this of there's so much that goes into these negotiations and you know what you have to secure and all of that getting a record deal these days is a lot different, I imagine, than it would have been if this was 1972 or 1973. You know.
Yeah, people. I mean, seriously. I mean, I will, you know, plug, as they used to say, the record label. I mean, Cherry Red were absolutely fantastic, helping us get this together, and understanding both the record and, you know, because, you know, well, Tayla filmed it,
right?
You can see it.
Now, the album didn't come out until after he passed. Did he get to see the final artwork?
Lee knew that.
Yeah.
You know, because we couldn't get it out until 21.
Sure.
Because of the backlog, the wait we had for vinyl.
Yeah, it was ridiculous. Well, and because there's only a couple of places really that print vinyl anyway, and so many bands were recording during the pandemic, and the backlog was getting pretty insane.
In 2020, once you had finished everything with a record, it was a year to get vinyl.
Mm-hmm.
A year.
Did he get to see the final artwork though, the
Yes.
booklet and all that? Oh, he did. Okay, good.
Yes,
Good.
And he loved it.
Yeah.
Because Hugh did it. Hugh Gilmore did that for me, and he's a designer I've known for a long, long time, and a huge fan of Lee's Heep and rock itself, and he understood, and you know, he did a great job. Great job.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and so is the album. I mean, it's just very passionate. I love it. Like I said, from.
But isn't it great? I mean, if people are listening to your podcast that haven't heard the album, it's the documentary, because you'll have the serious, you'll have the fun, port and brandy, you know.
Absolutely. And I will have the links where you can get the album in the show notes, and also the documentary as well, because I definitely want you guys to go and check it out. It's so beautifully done. Tayla, I don't know if there's anything that I could say you could have done better, or this should have been in there and that shouldn't. I think it's perfect from beginning to end. It is a great, well-told story. It's an emotional journey. I really feel like watching that, I feel like I was with Lee through this, and to be able to create that, to be able to put me there with you guys who I've never met, was pretty magical.
Thank you so much for that. What was really important was for the fans to get to know Lee in his home, and to invite them into his home and get up close and personal, even to the point where we were showing how to do the Lee Kerslake shuffle. And I won't give too much away, but obviously there is a toilet shot in there.
Yes.
Yeah.
It tells the story, but it also fits in with Lee's humor. So the more I got to know Lee over the years, the more I knew what would work and what wouldn't work. But yeah, it was very important to invite people in to find out who he really was.
Yeah, I'll tell you, as a drummer myself, did a video a couple of years ago to explain the double shuffle to people, because he does that on so many songs. And as I was covering every song with the Uriah Heep podcast, I thought, I'm talking about this all the time, but I think people need a visual. So here I sit down behind my electronic drum kit and I'm doing it, and I'm like, God, this is hard. And I'm playing it at 1/10 of the speed that he's playing a song like Return to Fantasy. And I'm like, man, he really nailed this style of playing. And of course, then like 2 weeks later, Russell Gilbert comes out with a video that just blew mine out of the water. I'm like, I'm just going to delete mine. Nobody needs to see this.
Well, I think, going back, no disrespect to your video, but I think, and I will give this away to a point, but there's a clip we have of Ken talking about Lee in July Morning in the documentary. So anybody listening to this, go watch that clip, listen to what Ken says about Lee as a drummer, because don't get better than that.
Yeah, I think
that song,
so
that
eloquent.
song I have heard live all over this planet, and I would say that song is more important to most Uriah Heep fans than Lady in Black.
I would agree with that.
It's their anthem.
And sadly, he wasn't on the original recording, but his versions of it, playing it live, that I've heard, have just been
and what Ken said.
Yeah, and what Ken said. Yeah, I couldn't say it better than he did, so I'll shut up. But don't feel bad. Like, if you wanted to disrespect my video, I'd be fine with that. It was horrible. I will fully admit it was the most elementary version of trying to be a drummer that I've ever seen anyone actually post anywhere.
Oh.
I want to thank you guys so much for taking some time, and not just to take some time and talk to me about this, but for all your work, both of you, on the documentary, for taking the time and the great effort to put it out there. I think it's just an amazing piece of art in and of itself, regardless of the subject matter and the journey. I think just the way that you filmed it, the quality of it, the audio quality is there in every scene. There's no, well, they didn't get great audio here. I mean, it's a quality piece in and of itself. And then you take the subject matter, the particular journey that we're following, and all that. And I mean, it's all the feels for me. Before we wrap up, Tayla, what are you working on now? Or can you tell us? I should ask you.
Yeah, I can. So my next documentary is Jimi Hendrix, The Missing Millions.
Ooh, that's going to be fascinating.
Yes.
Another one who left us far too soon.
I'm making a documentary, and it's called Watching Tayla Finding the Missing Jimi Hendrix.
I want to see that film too. It's just Steve standing there watching.
Yeah.
So what's happening in your world, Steve?
Oh, a lot of things. A lot of things. Well, our propaganda are at the moment, they've hit the coal face, a rich seam of writing. They're really, really now putting in their hours in social media, which all young bands have to do today, unfortunately, or fortunately. We just started playing shows again. So we got festivals this summer. 2 big festivals, some smaller shows, and writing, and hopefully we might even do some recording in June.
Oh, good.
And if just some of these songs, and then album in the autumn, come early winter.
Nice. Oh, that's exciting. I will also plug another one of your artists, my friend Paul Newton, the original bass player for Uriah Heep. Incredibly nice guy. I have not had a chance to read his book yet, but he finally wrote his book, Bone Structure, which is available on Amazon UK. And I am looking forward to getting a copy and reading that as well when I have a chance. You've really worked with a lot of great artists over the years. We talked about that when you were on before too.
I went to see, I spent a day and a night with Paul and Joan, his wife, last October in Cardiff. I went down to see Heep, went down to see Mick and the boys playing. Paul, obviously, and Joan came. That was a great night, actually. Great show. Really great show. They did it in 2 sections. First part acoustic, intermission, then electric. And I
was this on the 50th anniversary celebration?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. That was delayed 2 years because of the world disease, but that's how it goes. Yeah. No, awesome. Yeah, Paul's a great guy.
So that was good. Yeah, Paul's good as gold.
Yeah. Well, everyone go check out this documentary, Lee Kerslake, Not on the Heep. It's absolutely incredible. Steve, Tayla, thank you guys so much for coming on the show and chatting about it. It's great to meet you, Tayla. I'm really looking forward to this Jimi Hendrix documentary. That should be fascinating. And Paul, definitely keeping up with our propaganda. And of course, you and I stay in touch fairly regularly. Thank you guys so much.
Take care. Thanks.
You bet. We'll talk to you guys soon.